I've heard that name.
Aren't you in the Book of Celebrants? Isn't there a whole chapter about you?
Don't be ridiculous, Franklin. I've read the files. The Doctor is a man.
I've had an upgrade. I'd say it was more of a volume than a chapter. Just so you know.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to ThisWeekInGeek.net. I'm your host, Mike the Birdman. And well, this is sort of a return to Botched Roll. This is the show that I occasionally try and resurrect on this show, which talks about role-playing games. Sometimes I give interviews with people. Sometimes I talk about my own personal experiences. But today, I've actually got something that I've had in the works since last year, mostly probably just due to pandemic stuff, scheduling, and the huge company behind this. It's taken a bit of a trick to make this happen, but I'm really glad we got a chance to talk about this, as I have reviewed several books in this particular games line before. And I'm going to be talking about Doctor Who Adventures in Time and Space. No, scratch that. I'm actually going to be talking about Doctor Who, the role-playing game, 2nd edition, which is available in PDF right now from Cubicle 7, but you can also pre-order this physical, and that should be coming out later on this year. I'm actually talking with the lead writer, David F. Chapman. This is the guy who does the RPG A Day that generally happens during the summer. He's written several blog posts, which you can find in the website linked below. Most recently published an article talking about licensed RPGs. What a coincidence, we're going to be talking about one of those today. And we're going to be talking about basically what it takes to get involved in the role-playing game industry. As you know, I have aspirations to be a part of this world, but also just working on a licensed IP that has such a unique feel and vibe to it that it's not your traditional dungeon crawl / murder hobo simulator. So, without any further ado, let's welcome Dave, the lead writer of Doctor Who, the 2nd edition, the role-playing game. Let's talk to Dave. Dave, what is up this morning in jolly old England?
Hi. Well, it's afternoon here, and it's brilliant sunshine, and I should really be working, but this is a lovely distraction from it.
I gotta say, it is exciting to talk to someone from the Doctor Who team, as this is one of the role-playing games that I think best exemplifies that a licensed role-playing game doesn't have to be just, here is a D20 system reskin, or here's something that's just kind of cheap and just kind of thrown away. To handle a property such as this, you not only have to love the source material, you have to understand how the show's written. And I myself, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, Doctor Who, the role-playing game, has been one of those things I've tried to write for years, but I've always been intimidated to run, because I've seen how the different showrunners and writers of the television show capture these exciting adventures. And one of the things that sets Doctor Who, the role-playing game, apart is people who shoot guns tend to go last here. So it's a different type of action-y vibe that the traditional role player might have trouble, I would even argue, adjusting to, because this is such a different type of role playing that I've ever come across.
Definitely, and that was probably one of the hardest things to address straight away. It was the lack of there's certainly violence in the series. It's just that the protagonists aren't the ones doing it, and they're the ones trying to stop all the violence and stop all the bloodshed. So that's definitely one of the hardest things to try and get into the game when we first started working on it. This must be, about 13 years ago now. And trying to reflect the lethality of the weapons in Doctor Who. I mean, let's face it, every time a Dalek or a Cyberman comes along, it's usually a good zap and it's glowing blue skeleton and you're dead. So that was another tricky thing to address. So trying to manipulate the rules to try and reflect that experience, and trying to get the people to talk, to go first, to try and calm the situation down, and let's face it, the Doctor's very good at talking their way out of a situation, and trying to get them to get that first shot in so to speak, of talking their way out of it before the actual gunfire happens. That was the real challenge, but good fun doing.
One of the other things that I found unique about the Doctor Who role-playing game is an old video I saw on YouTube a long time ago, and it's always kind of stuck with me, mentioned to never have established canon characters in your game because they will overshadow the accomplishments of the PCs. Yet Doctor Who, because I was reading through the book last night, there's an example that they talk about where, well, who gets to play the Doctor? And now we have 13 plus and now endless possibilities with the Timeless Child kind of thing thrown into the mix. How do you balance who gets to play the Doctor in play? Because obviously everybody would want to play their like favorite, but how does that compare to somebody like, say, Rory and Amy from the 11th Doctor, who are great companions, but they're not the Doctor with the sonic screwdriver and are fighting Cybermen face to face. Yet those two were able to stand on their own, for example, when they had their own adventures with the 11th.
Oh yeah, I think it's all balanced out mostly through story points. So the Doctor has fewer story points to manipulate the world around them, while the supporting characters, the companions and the fam, as they call them now, they've got a few more story points that they can do dramatic things just as effectively without being as powered as the Doctor, so to speak. It's something that I was a little influenced through my time when I worked on Eden Studios' Buffy the Vampire Slayer RPG, because that had a very similar sort of way of balancing things. So, because let's face it, in Buffy, the Slayer has all the strength and all the power, but the Scooby Gang had the more interesting storylines. So that kind of balanced it out a bit.
Now, one of the things that I like about Doctor Who is the simplicity, the elegance of its actual design. And you guys have used a system that is called the Vortex System. So if you could explain that in simple layman's terms, how might you explain the system if you wanted to pitch somebody this game in an elevator at a convention? You really want them to come to your table, but they don't want math heavy stuff. How do you convince them in 45 seconds or less?
Oh, blimey, now there's a challenge. The Vortex System's a really simple bit of attribute plus skill. Roll a couple of d6s and try and beat a target number. And that is basically it. At the first edition, there were some extra maths involved through traits, and we've removed a lot of that and simplified things to make it even faster. So basically, you shouldn't have to spend any time really while you're playing the game looking anything up, because it's all pretty basic and pretty quick and simple and shouldn't get in the way of the narrative and the story.
Now, speaking of looking things up, you guys have been supporting the Doctor Who role-playing game in some form or another for what feels like an entire, or actually, I guess at this point, several regeneration cycles.
Yeah.
What are some of the source books that are some of your favorite across the line of Doctor Who? I think I own all but one of them.
Oh, excellent. Well, before we started talking, I know you said about how the Doctor source books were one of your faves, and I must admit, when we first approached the BBC and talked to them about it, we wanted to make sure that the books were informative and interesting to people who weren't even going to role play. They were people who were just buying them as a collector's item, or even a reference for the TV series. And that, I think the source books are for each Doctor are definitely something along those lines. I have a bit of a soft spot for the Defending the Earth supplement, which was the Unit source book, because it meant that we got to tackle Unit from its earliest appearances right up to its most recent ones. and tried to sort out the controversy of unit dating. I'm not sure how successful we were, but we certainly gave it a go. Trying to think. The Time Traveler's Companion was another big one for us as well, which was trying to add a complete history sort of thing to Gallifrey and the Time Lords, and to customizing your TARDIS, and it has the superbly over the top character sheet for your TARDIS, which is hexagonal and laid out like the TARDIS console, so you can plug in individual sort of features to your TARDIS onto the character sheet. I do particularly like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, like it's really cool to see companies support their licensed IPs this well, and the fact that you're drawing upon 50 or 60 years of established history on the television show is really awesome. And like being able to give depth to the system, like you mentioned, with designing your own TARDIS, you can design your own Vortex manipulators. Now, something, a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. Years ago, when you and I first started becoming friends on Facebook, I was still reviewing products for this, which I still am currently, but I mainly covered Doctor Who. And I inquired, do you guys have any pieces of the older box set, specifically the 10th Doctor box set, which is one that I didn't have. And on eBay at that time, they were going for ludicrously high prices. So fortunately, one was sent to me, and I asked specifically for you, could you design me a gadget that was unique to me? Do you remember what that gadget did?
I remember well, yes. It was right in the middle of me. It's at the start of me developing my own game system called Wild, which was a game about that was heavily influenced by things like Inception or Neil Gaiman's Sandman. So it was all about dream share technology, and I was really into researching and writing about that. So when you asked about designing a gadget for Doctor Who, then that was the logical thing to do, was to create a dream share device, and that's, I think, what I put in there for you.
Yes. So let's talk about gadgets for just a minute. So, in the world of Doctor Who, there are gadgets such as psychic paper, there's the sonic screwdriver, plus whatever weird gadget the Doctor might need in a heartbeat and they just happen to have access to. But let's talk about the process of making gadgets for your own characters or your own versions of the Doctor using the system in the book.
They're basically very, very small characters, because they have their own abilities, they have their own set of story points, and you craft them you can either craft them using your gadget abilities, your technology skills, and things like that. So you can cobble things together using household items. And when the gadget is complete, you're basically channeling some of your character's personal story points into the device that it can hold for a period of time. And while you have lost those story points for a little bit, the device has got them, and they can do special things with it. So you can create your weird device that can scan things, but if you need it to do something dramatic and not planned, then it can spend its own story points to accomplish them. And then, of course, that's a great way of, if you've got a character who's running out of story points and might be in danger of getting killed, you can pass them a gadget, and they've got extra story points that they can draw upon and get them out of a sticky situation.
So one of the other things that makes Doctor Who unique among properties, it has some of the most iconic villains in sci-fi. We have the Jadoon. We have, of course, the Daleks and the Cybermen. When you look at some of the crazy creatures that have appeared over the years, some more human than others in terms of how they empathize with humanity and work with the Doctor and other people who travel the vortex, what was the most interesting alien or concept to bring to life across any of the source books?
Oh, blimey! Now you're talking. That's another tricky one. Um, I think Daleks are probably one of the more complicated ones because they've been around for so long. They've changed and adapted. They've fragmented into different groups that have even fought against each other. And then at their heart, when you're trying to create the stats for them, you have to bear in mind that at their heart, they aren't a big robotic creature or anything like that. They're a small, relatively helpless mutant that is encased almost in its own traveling tank, and taking it out of that situation, it's really vulnerable. So yeah, I think Daleks are probably one of the trickiest ones to tackle, and certainly the Weeping Angels as well. Because it seems like every time the Weeping Angels appear in the series, there's another bit of lore to adapt and include into their histories. It's certainly when you look at things like Flux, the season 13, that's certainly changed our interpretation of what the Weeping Angels were quite dramatically as well. So, yeah.
So, as things start to come to an end on the latest incarnation of the Doctor, her most recent special just aired as of this recording within the last couple of weeks, and things are starting to enter the next regeneration at some point very soon. What can you tell me about her book that is currently in development, I would presume, anyway?
Yeah, we're just starting to look at that now so that we can get a bit of a head start on it, because there's a lot to get in there. It's going to be a quite a chunky book. But yeah, there's a lot to address, especially with the Timeless Child stuff and Division, which I'm hoping will be fully explained in the centenary special in November. Fingers crossed. Yeah, we're starting work on that now, and hopefully it will fit on the shelves with the previous 12 volumes and sit in there nicely. And I'm looking forward to that one coming out. That should be quite good. But as I say, early days yet. We've got lots in the pipeline before then.
Exceptional. So I guess, Dave, as we start to kind of wrap things up, let's get a chance to know the man behind the proverbial sonic screwdriver and psychic paper that we all enjoyed to play this game. How did you get involved in the industry? Because I followed you because you started Free RPG Day, and then I found out you wrote Doctor Who, but you mentioned Buffy, Eden Studios. You've got a career. Tell me about it.
Oh, blimey. That's a tricky one. I tried getting into game designing in the late 80s, just after I left school, because I was heavily inspired by Ghostbusters. I love that game so much. The West End Games is Ghostbusters RPG. And then I became a mature student, went to university, came out there doing graphic design and wanted to get into comic art. So I formed a comic publishing company, and through that I started talking to Eden Studios because a friend of mine introduced me to the Conspiracy X RPG, which knowing that I was a massive X-Files fan. And so I contacted Eden Studios and said, hey, did you fancy me doing a comic strip based on Conspiracy X? And that kind of all fell through because the independent comic scene was just sort of waning again, and the big two were coming back into the fore. But I kept in touch with George Vasilikos and Alex Jerkat at Eden Studios, and I ended up asking them if I could write for them. So I wrote a supplement for All Flesh Must Be Eaten, which has never seen light of day, but was thankfully enough to get my foot in the door. And they got me working on Terra Primate and Buffy, Army of Darkness, and some more All Flesh Must Be Eaten stuff. And then, due to my love of Conspiracy X, I convinced them to let me change Conspiracy X from its original system over to the Unisystem that CJ Corella had created, that all their other games were using. So Conspiracy X was the odd one that wasn't Unisystem. So I managed to convince George into letting me work on that one. And then there's a strange chain of events after that. Conspiracy X came out. I got an email from somebody who had purchased it and liked it, and we started chatting online. And that turned out to be Chris Birch, who is the head of Modifius. This was long before he went into game publishing. And we started chatting online about how we should try and aim. It would be good if we could get a license for something that the kids would be interested in, to try and get another generation interested in tabletop role-playing games. And I said, oh yeah, it'd be great if we could get something like James Bond or Doctor Who or something like that. And he said, well, funnily enough, I know somebody at the BBC. And so we teamed up with Dominic McDowell and Angus Abranson, who had just been forming Cubicle 7. And we went and pitched to the BBC saying, we'd like to do this. And we thought we had absolutely no chance, because we know that there hasn't really been anything Doctor Who orientated since the old Time Lord game that I think Virgin published in the 80s. And we didn't think we stood much of a chance. And so we kind of went in, well, this will be a good experience, won't it? And they said yes. So it all kind of continued from there. So I've been kind of freelance working for Cubicle 7 for a few years, did Wild, started RPG a Day because of some negativity I was finding online when it came to game reviewers and just game community in general. There were a lot of people just slagging each other off, basically, and I thought, hey, we should try and get some positivity in there. So I tried to initiate a scheme where people just talked positively about RPGs, and that became RPG a Day in August, which is coming up to its 9th year now this year. And then that was about it up until last year. Cubicle 7 foolishly decided to offer me a full-time job, so I quit my day. I quit my day job in retail because I was working in a nerdy shop which sold a lot of Doctor Who stuff, and now full-time at Cubicle 7 as a producer, which
oh wow,
was a bit of a surprise, but it's been great fun.
One of the things that I'm always curious to know is, what are some of the pieces of advice you can give to someone who wants to enter the game design field? For example, I myself am just starting to write adventures. I have an opportunity to present my work to some people and potentially have it develop into something further. But if some average fan out there wants to do this on their own, what are some of the things they can do to get noticed or to make their design skills better?
Ooh, now you're talking. When it came to the stuff that I was doing, it was mostly a case of just approaching the companies and saying, if I sent you anything, would you be willing to have a look? A lot of the time, when you're approaching a bigger company, you'll have to sign some sort of NDA beforehand, just to protect the big company, basically, so that you can't accuse them of stealing your idea if they're working on something similar at the same time, because you never know. You might submit this brilliant idea and they've had one in development for a year and just haven't told anybody, and then so make sure the paperwork first. Secondly, just offer to have a go. And I know things have changed quite dramatically with the indie development so far, so you can actually publish things yourself quite easily and get them done through drive-through and so on. So that's always a good way to go as well. Just make sure that it's as professional as you can get it. Make sure it's been read and reviewed and edited and gone over multiple times, and make sure you don't use the word will all the time, which is a bit of advice I saw online this week, because like first thing the editors do is get rid of every time you say will, because that's always a great bit of advice. But otherwise, yeah, just go for it. You never know. We're always on the look out for writers as well. So if ever you wanted to try writing for Doctor Who, feel free, get in touch. You can drop me a line at Cubicle 7 and we can get you NDA'd up. And I'm trying to start a thing where new writers can submit a small adventure idea, and we're going to compile those, and you'll get paid for them. And we're going to compile those into little PDF collections. So there's going to be a little collection of short adventure ideas for GMs who are running short of ideas, and you can just flick to one of those and expand it to a proper adventure yourself. So yeah, we're always on the lookout. Just go for it.
Wow. All right. Well, there you go, guys. There's definitely some ideas if you are aspiring Whovian who wishes to dip their cyber formatted toe into something interesting. And I guess, Dave, as a final couple of questions, and I want to end on a more positive, super high positive note here.
Oh yeah, go for it.
What are some of the best conversations you're seeing happening in the tabletop space right now? I heard you mention indie development and stuff like the DM's Guild.
Yeah. I mean, certainly when things like Zine Quest and that started, just the sheer ingenuity and brilliance of some of the games that have been coming out recently, they have completely floored me, and I spend a lot of time looking at them going, oh, wow, why didn't I think of those? And even some of the larger companies like Free League absolutely blow me away with the things that they're doing. Tales from the Loop, I think, has to be one of my favourite games of ever, really, certainly of the last 10 years. And that was a complete eye-opener, just looking at how small the rule system was compared to the massive setting. That was just, yeah, I just remember reading that and thinking, why have I not done this before? This is genius. But yeah, the indie scene, great. I mean, I love a lot of the one-page RPGs that have been circulating online. The way that you can condense everything down to that, and they're not getting bogged down in so many rules, and you're just basically having fun around the table and creating worlds for yourself. It's great.
So I'm going to throw a question at you, and then I'm going to ask you a serious question.
Uh-oh.
Okay. So you mentioned one of my all-time favorite IPs of all time, because Dave, you and I have been friends for years.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably going to guess what I'm going to ask you next.
Go on.
Why the hell is there not a Ghostbusters RPG? Goddammit. Because we need the Ghostbusters. We saw how well Afterlife did. You love the property. You work in an RPG company. What do we got to do to get a proton pack on you?
Oh, God, I love Ghostbusters so much. Okay, so there's a weird tale. I went to Dragon Meet convention in London about 4 years ago, and I arrived at the convention, and Dom from Cubicle 7 grabbed me and said, "Oh, we're going to go and do this podcast." So he got dragged off into this little cupboard somewhere, and we're doing this podcast. And in the middle of this podcast, Dom dropped the bombshell that Cubicle 7 actually went for the Ghostbusters license, and they were really close to getting it as well. I was just sitting there while Dom was saying this with my jaw on the floor going, I love Ghostbusters so much. Why did you not tell me? And yeah, apparently they were very close to getting the Ghostbusters license, and it was kind of nixed at the last minute. I think mostly by Hasbro might have stopped them because they thought it was a toy, and they've got an exclusivity on basically it. But there have been a lot of board games and card games and things like that since. So who knows? I keep dropping hints saying, look, we should do Ghostbusters. I love it so much. We should really do it, especially after Afterlife, because that was so good.
Yeah, that was so much fun. And I remember years back, probably about 2014, I finally got my hands on a Ghostbusters box set from England. This sucker was beat up, but is one of the most treasured RPGs that I have left of my 1980s collection. And I even had someone give me replica ghost dice from one of the Canadian Ghost Core companies, which was really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I guess my final question to you, Dave, is if you could resurrect or use any IP, you have complete creative control for it. What IP is it? What are your first 3 Splat books?
Oh, God. There's a good one. Okay. There's so many to choose from. Oh, how could you do this to me? The absolute dream IPs. The first would be Twin Peaks, because I love Twin Peaks. That's I love Twin Peaks so much. First books would be A Guide to the Town, and then A Guide to the Lodges and Weird Happenings and stuff like that. I honestly wouldn't know where to go from there, but yeah, I loved. Probably an FBI book.
Wow.
Second dream IP would probably be X-Files, because I love X-Files. I loved it since the very first episode and been obsessed ever since. I'd love to do X-Files. And there's so much you could do for that. So much. It'd be great. Could have a
Syndicate source book alone would be in volumes.
Oh God, yes. And then you could have like the Monster of the Week books, and then you could have like individual series guides like we've done with the Doctor source books and stuff like that. But yeah, oh yes, that would be my other one. And thirdly, possibly the Magicians, because I love the series and love the books as well for the Magicians. So yeah, I do love my magical school settings, so to speak, as they say, and Magicians did it so well.
Well, I gotta say, Dave, this has been a fantastic conversation today. And if people wanted to follow your work online, where would they have to go to find you?
Probably the easiest bet is to go to the website, which is autocratic.com. If you change the last C to a K, you'll find it. That's where I host the RPG a Day stuff in August, as well as my general ramblings, and you can follow my massive rewatch of everything in the Marvel universe in chronological order, through to the development of games and things like that, but at least stuff that I can share that isn't protected by NDAs. But yeah, that's probably the best bet.
All right, Dave. Well, once again, thank you for spending so much time with us today on This Week in Geek. I want you to hold the line for just a minute.
No problem at all.
All right, guys. Well, that has been my interview with Dave Chapman. He is the lead writer over at Cubicle and producer for the Doctor Who second edition of the role-playing game. Please, guys, give this a check out. You can go to Cubicle 7's website. You can also purchase this and other books on drivethrurpg.com. I am really excited to cover this game here on the show, so look for my review probably in just a couple of weeks. And, well, folks, hopefully you've had a good time here on the show. So until next time here on Botched Roll on ThisWeekInGeek.net, let's hope you don't roll a critical one.
So that's what you've been doing. Reconstructing yourself from memory. And remnants. And spare parts.
I am rebuilt.
What do you call this look? Junkyard chic.
Earth is now under the control of the Daleks.
No, it's not. You couldn't even control one person.
Humanity will surrender.
They really won't. Trust me, I've seen them in action. They've fought off so many things, including the worst of their own people. They're really stubborn. Have you not worked that out yet? Even the recon scout Daleks, the first ones out of Skaro. Humanity bands together, vanquishes you, and buries you for centuries.
Yet I survived.
Yeah.
You're good at that. But it won't be enough.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.